Hey guys, let's continue our lesson on principles of design. The first principle of design is balance. When you're creating your art piece, whether it's photography, painting, drawing, or any other form of art, you want to make sure that you are creating some balance in there. Mainly because humans are drawn to balance by nature. So the more balanced the work is, the easier for the viewer to spend time in looking at that art piece. The first type, there are actually three ways that we could create that balance. One is a symmetrical balance, asymmetrical balance, and a radial balance. Let's take a look at some example. A symmetrical balance is basically when you draw a line in the middle of your composition, whether horizontal or vertical, you would have exactly the same shapes and forms on either side. Let's take a look at some photographs here. In the picture on the right hand side, if you draw a line horizontally across the image, you see that the reflection of the building is in the water, so therefore it is exactly symmetrical, right? In the picture on the left hand side, if you draw a line vertically, you have everything on both sides exactly the same. So that's the simplest form, right? And then we got asymmetrical balance, which is probably the most complicated one, and I would only say that it comes with experience. There is no set rule that I can tell you that you can follow to make it. It has a lot of elements that lets you to create a symmetrical balance. I've been doing art for over 20 years or so now, but that is something that every time that I would create something that I want to have asymmetrical balance, I would have to look at the color combination. For example, yellow is light and black is dark. So if I want to put a spot in black, I have to have a lot of yellow to cover for that. I could not have the same amount of black and yellow and say, okay, these are the same. They're not, because black is heavier in light and all kinds of properties. So that is a very, very long conversation, long lesson. And I do my best as we go through the course to describe them to you. But for you to just know and recognize that there's something called asymmetrical balance, here's a very basic description. This is or symmetrical balance or informal balance. This results when objects of a composition are unequal in size and shapes, arranged in a balanced way but less symmetrical. For example, large objects in one half of the composition may be placed closer to the center than a small shape in the other half to create a balance. So these sketches here, or these drawings are, the shapes are the same, but they have different colors. Overall, when you look at it, they have balance in them, similar to this hand. Let's take a look at a photograph. So this is a little different. None of the shapes are the same, but overall, when you're looking at this, you would see that similar to this dark shape of the rock, you have similar on the right hand side. They're not exactly the same, but they're balanced, sort of. And then in the lower part, you would have similar shapes, right? And so on the right and left, you have similar shapes and value and color. On the other side, when you look at the entire picture, you see the amount of darker colors are about the same as the lighter colors in the background, right? So again, there is no set rule on this, but you'll get exposure to them, and we do different practices to hopefully train your eyes on creating an asymmetrical balance. The next type is radial balance. So in this form, design radiates from the center. These are some drawings done by humans, so man-made. And then the next examples are from nature. So in nature, you could find that radial balance in looking at a flower from top, or if you cut a fruit like orange or grapefruit in half, you would have that same radial balance. Next principle of design is movement. So basically what it is, with creating similar lines, forms, colors, or textures, you could guide the viewer's eyes to follow certain way. So they would start looking from one part moving to the other part. For example, in this example, by following this blue line and all these little lines that are in the same form and shape, your eyes are kind of following that movement, right? Either from center out or from edge of the composition coming all the way to the inner part. Yellow is following the same path, and they kind of get mixed in the middle, and they create some sort of green in the middle between yellow and blue. So that is a movement. When you're looking for a movement around you, you could actually, these are some good examples. These bikes are in the row and they have that movement, they're conveying the movement. Or looking at this staircase, the repetition of the stairs going down and forming that circular form are creating movement. Or even these nice shadows and the waves on the surface of the water. So as you can see, all these three examples, they have movement in them. Here's an example of an artwork. By repeating the same directional line, this artist created that movement, right? So your eyes just want to kind of follow those lines. The next principle is rhythm. Rhythm is established in a composition when similar forms are repeated, either regularly or irregularly. Repetition can result from systematic change in color, value, shapes, texture, or size. Repetition of shape is also called pattern, right? So in this example, the artist repeated the same form and same sort of colors, gradually changing colors. There's a system. So for example, it's in this section, it's teal becoming a little lighter and lighter and lighter. And here we have a group of greens are being repeated in the same form and changing the value, and with the red and oranges. So that is one way of creating rhythm. Also, if you take the same unit and repeat it, you could also create the exact same thing. So in this picture, this is an installation of art. So that cube is exactly, they're all the same, but they've been repeated with the exact same distance. And there is your rhythm. If I want to read over this, the single unit in a pattern is a motif. Okay, you will be hearing me talking about design motif a lot. That's a very common word that we use. So just get familiar with that word. Motif can be repeated at regular or irregular intervals to form a pattern. If alternation motif are used, a sequence, a more complicated rhythm is established, providing a variation of the thing, right? So you could have, for example, all of these cubes could be the same, and suddenly you could have a very large cube. And then you're going to go back and repeat the smaller ones, right? So that would be a little more complex pattern. So rhythm, movement, pattern, they're sort of the same, and they can help each other, right? So usually when you have a rhythm in a piece of art, you also have a pattern. and you also have movement, right? You could not separate them. And then, oops, sorry, I just moved too fast. And the last sentence here, regular repetition tends to produce a balanced but monotonous rhythm. So it is more balanced if you have only one motif repeated. Here are some examples. Even though in the far right and left images you see they're not really the same, but the artist is repeating the same concept, their houses, right? So their houses, and they're being repeated in different shapes and forms. It is more complex rhythm, but they do have rhythm, right? Same with this other one. And this picture right in the middle is a simpler form. So your colored pencil are going up and down, following the same sort of movement, and that also creates a rhythm in your image. More example, in photography here we have the zebra. Actually, the actual lines are being repeated, even though they're not regular. Some of them are a different shape. They're kind of irregular shapes and lines being repeated, but overall they create a rhythm. And in this interior photo, the repetition of the stairs are creating that rhythm. Next item is pattern. A pattern is a design in which lines, shapes, forms, or colors are repeated. The part that is repeated is called motif. Pattern can be regular or irregular. So in the image in the middle, you see the artist created different, like for example, let's take a look at that one right there. So by repeating the same curvy lines over and over, even though they're not exactly the same shape, the artist created a pattern, right? And in this one, looks like a fish scale. By repeating the same form, the artist created a pattern. Here, by creating the same or repeating the same circles and ovals, the pattern was created. On the picture on the right hand side, even though none of these flowers are the same, although maybe some of them are, I can't recognize exactly, but the idea is that the flowers have been repeated, and that is creating a pattern for you. This is a little more complex. It is a different type of pattern. When you get into painting with pigments and actual, like painting, you will be able to create patterns similar to texture as you go. This work of art is done by alcohol and acrylic. So the artist is creating some sort of pattern without brush stroke, without really painting it. It's a natural reaction of alcohol to the paint that creates all these spots, but that is also a pattern. So I'm trying to give you different examples to train your eyes on that. Next slide, we have more example of patterns taken from nature. These are photos. So this is the repetition of the feather on a bird, honeycomb, and these are some painting cans, I believe they are. So whether they're the same color or not, or shape, by repeating similar elements, you're able to create pattern. Next principle of design is contrast. Contrast is achieved by using a strong variation within the elements, light colors against dark, large shapes with the small ones, or smooth texture beside rough ones. Contrast creates interest in composition. One composition may have many kinds of contrast. However, these must not be allowed to distract from the unity of the composition. So in this example, you have a very bright yellow leaf on wooden background in a different color. So the color has contrast, but also not only the color, but the texture has the contrast. The texture of the leaf is very different from the texture of the wood in the background. So that creates a contrast. This is another form of contrast, just colors. They're all blacks, even though the texture is the same. They're sharing similar glassy texture, but one is white, the rest are in black. All right, next one is emphasis. So with emphasis, basically what you do as an artist, you draw attention to a specific part of your art piece. In this case, everything is kind of muted in the background, and the flowers are, first, they're in different colors, they're not gray, and their shapes, and they also right at the front, and they're on golden lines. So we'll talk about all of that, rule of third and golden locations, all that a little later in the course. But at the moment, all you really want to know is that you could create emphasis, drawing attention to certain parts by using different shapes, different colors, different textures. Let's take a look at this next example. For example, the viewer will be just looking at that blue tree right there because it's very different in color, right? Even though the shape is similar to everything in the background, but the artist decided to paint this one tree in blue and everything else in grayscale. So that is bringing attention to the front, therefore the emphasis is on that tree. Let's take a look at the next example here. Similar idea, so everything is pretty blank and simple. Everything is muted, sort of. And then you suddenly have a tree placed in well, I just don't want to go into details with rule of third, but you'll kind of get exposed to that as we go through the course. But the location of this tree is also very special. It's been placed on those golden lines, and it draws attention there. There are more tricks to emphasis than just colors and shapes. We'll be talking about them again as we go through the course. But again, you could change the color, you can change the size, you can change the texture, and to create that emphasis. The last principle of design is unity. Unity is achieved by repeating the same shape, form, same color over and over to create that unifying feeling for the entire image. So in this example, all these trees are similar. They have, give or take, same shape, same colors, same heights. So that conveys the feeling of unity. Here in the next example, this is a drawing. Again, these are trees and they're being repeated. And so it's basically unity is the oneness of a work of art in which all elements and principles harmonize to produce a complete and visual satisfying composition. And we got one more example. This is a photograph. So again, the shapes and colors and forms of the flowers are the same, and it conveys the feeling of unity. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I think that's it for now. I will be explaining your assignment in the next video. Thank you guys. I'll see you in the class.